All right, let's talk about one of the most mysterious and, let's be honest, misunderstood groups in all of ancient history, the Anunnaki. Today, we're going to cut through all the noise, the conspiracy theories, the pop culture stuff, and get right to what the original texts, the actual Sumerian tablets, have to say. So, let's just dive right into the big question that seems to follow them everywhere. Were the Anunnaki just ancient gods, part of a pantheon that people in Mesopotamia worshipped? Or, as you've probably heard, were they some kind of extraterrestrial visitors who came down and kickstarted human civilization? It's a wild idea for sure, but let's see what the actual evidence tells us. Because really, you've got two completely different stories here. On one side, you have this modern myth of alien engineers creating humanity. But when you go back to the cuneiform texts, you find something else entirely. A really complex group of gods, right at the very heart of the Mesopotamian world. And that's the story we're digging into today. And here's the most important thing to get your head around from the very start. There is no single, easy definition for the Anunnaki. Who they were, what they did, even their status in the divine world. It all shifted, sometimes dramatically, depending on when the story was being told and where. Okay, let's get into it. To really understand this, we have to start at square one, with the name itself. If we can figure out what they were called and why, it's the first step to clearing up a whole lot of confusion. So the word we use, Anunnaki, actually comes from an older Sumerian term, Anunna, and most scholars think it means something along the lines of offspring of Anu, Anu being the great sky god, or maybe princely seed. So right off the bat, the name itself frames them not as aliens, but as some kind of divine royalty. Now, this is where it starts to get a little bit messy. So the Sumerian Anunna eventually becomes the Akkadian Anunnaki. Simple enough. But then there's this other group, the Ijigi, and they really throw a wrench in things. Sometimes Ijigi is just another name for the Anunnaki, but other times they're a totally separate lower class of gods. This ambiguity, this confusion, it's actually key to their whole story. Okay, so let's rewind the clock. Let's go all the way back to the earliest Sumerian texts we have. How did the people who first told these stories think about them? In these really early myths and hymns, the Anunna are basically a respected council of top-tier gods. They weren't some distant force. They were believed to live right there in the big Sumerian cities. They got food and offerings from people. They helped keep the universe running smoothly. And, this is a big one, they were the ones who decided the fate of all humanity. But, and this is super important, they weren't always at the absolute top of the pyramid. The texts are full of moments where the Anunnaki, as a group, are paying respect to even more powerful individual gods, like Enki, the god of wisdom, or the incredible goddess of love and war, Inanna. And this quote just says it all, doesn't it? It comes from a hymn written by a priestess named Enheduanna, and it shows the goddess Inanna being raised up above the entire collective of Anunnan gods. This is proof that the divine pecking order was flexible, and the Anunnaki's power wasn't always the final word. So we have this early role as a kind of divine, fate-decreeing council. But as Mesopotamian society changed, well, so did their gods. By the time we get to the old Babylonian period, the Anunnaki's role has been completely transformed. You see, as those Sumerian city-states started to give way to the massive Babylonian empire, new myths were needed to reflect this new way of life, this new social order. And this is where the story of the Anunnaki takes a really dramatic turn. The story that really flips the script here is the myth of Atrahasis. Because for the first time, it introduces a class system among the gods themselves. And it's all based on one simple idea: who does the work? I love this story. It sets up this whole new cosmic hierarchy. You've got the junior gods, the Ijiji, doing all the back-breaking work for the senior gods, the Anunnaki. And eventually, they just get fed up. They stage what is basically the first ever workers' strike, burn their tools, and surround the head god's house. And the Anunnaki's solution? Classic management move. Create a brand new, even lower class of being, that's us, humanity, to do the work for them. And this idea doesn't stop there. It gets even more formalized in the most famous Babylonian creation story, the Enuma Elish. In this one, the god of Babylon, Marduk, becomes king of the gods, and one of his first acts is to get the Anunnaki organized and assign them all specific jobs. And for the very first time, we get a solid number. Marduk takes all 600 Anunnaki and divides them up perfectly. 300 get jobs in the heavens, and the other 300 are sent to the underworld,
a lot of the time to serve as judges for the dead. I mean, they've gone from a general council to a full-on, structured, divine bureaucracy.
So, to sum up this whole later Babylonian period, the Anunnaki's job description has totally changed. They're now a managerial class, they're underworld judges, and in the famous Epic of Gilgamesh, they even become destructive, helping to cause the Great Flood. They become the ones who ultimately decide that all humans have to die. A much darker role, for sure. Okay, so we've followed their journey from a Sumerian council to Babylonian managers. But you have to ask, why does any of this matter? What's the big takeaway from watching this one group of gods evolve so much over time? Well, the answer is pretty clear, actually. The Anunnaki weren't one single thing. They obviously weren't aliens, but they weren't even a static group of gods. They were a flexible concept, a divine label that ancient people used and adapted to help make sense of their changing world and their place in it. Their story is really a mirror of our own human history. Think about it. Back when society was made up of smaller, independent city-states, the gods acted like a local council. But when the huge, centralized Babylonian Empire came along with its kings and bureaucrats, suddenly the Anunnaki are reimagined as a divine managerial class, overseeing cosmic labor. It's what scholars call a change in political theology, which is really just a fancy way of saying that the way we imagine our gods is deeply shaped by our own politics and our own power structures. Put it this way, our vision of heaven is almost always just a reflection of how we've organized our world right here on Earth. And that kind of leaves us with one final, pretty big thought. If the myths of the past were constantly being updated and rewritten to reflect the values and the structures of the people telling them, it really makes you wonder, doesn't it? Which of our own fundamental stories, our own beliefs, maybe even our own gods, are we subtly rewriting right now to better fit the world that we're building today?
If you've spent any time at all looking into ancient history or mythology, maybe even some modern theories, you've definitely bumped into the Anunnaki.
Oh, absolutely. They're almost unavoidable.
And in popular culture today, wow, they're often these, magnificent beings, maybe even extraterrestrials, descending to Earth, engineering humanity.
Right, bestowing advanced knowledge, building pyramids, the whole 9 yards. It's a really powerful image that's taken hold.
It really has. But it makes you wonder, where does that specific idea actually come from?
And that's the crucial question, isn't it? Because that modern, very specific image, it's almost entirely disconnected from what the original Mesopotamian texts actually say.
The Sumerian and Akkadian sources.
Exactly. The cuneiform tablets. When you dive into those, the historical Anunnaki are, they're a lot messier, more complex, their roles can seem contradictory, and how they change over centuries of writing is, frankly, kind of bewildering.
Bewildering is a good word for it. So, okay, our mission in this deep dive is basically to cut through that modern noise. We're going straight to the ancient evidence.
Using the hymns, the epics, the scholarly takes on those texts.
Yeah, using them like a roadmap. We want to track how this divine collective, the Anunnaki, evolved.
Yeah.
Because their job description, their status, even their political weight, it wasn't fixed.
Not at all.
Yeah.
It shifted, sometimes dramatically, depending on who was writing the myth and, importantly, why they were writing it.
And that brings us to that core paradox you mentioned earlier. When you look at the text over time diachronically, right?
Mm-hmm.
The Anunnaki seem to be like multiple things at once. Sometimes they're the absolute top gods, the rulers.
Right, the highest echelon.
Other times they're celestial gods grouped with another set, the Igigi.
Yeah, sometimes almost synonymous.
And then later on, boom, they become these powerful, maybe even fearsome 7 judges ruling the underworld.
It's a huge arc. They go from being cosmic providers, gods who could apparently be scared by mountains, to becoming these imperial administrators who literally decree human mortality.
That is a massive journey. Okay, let's unpack that. We have to start at the beginning, right? The name itself. What are we actually dealing with here? What did Anunnaki mean to the people carving those tablets thousands of years ago?
Okay, the name. The main term we use is Anunnaki. That's the Akkadian version.
And there's a Sumerian version, too.
Yes, Anuna or Anuna. In cuneiform, you see Danunnake 4. This is kind of the first hurdle for understanding them properly.
Because the usual translation seems pretty straightforward, linking them to the big sky god Anu.
That's the standard take, yeah.
Yeah.
Philologically, it connects to Anu or An, meaning offspring of Anu.
Mm.
Makes sense, right? Children of the chief deity.
Mm-hmm.
But there's an alternative etymology that the sources mention, and I think it's, maybe more revealing about their status within the pantheon.
Right.
The suggested reading of princely seed.
princely seed. Okay, that has a different ring to it.
Yeah.
It immediately gives them this aristocratic vibe, doesn't it?
Exactly. It implies their high-status nobility, part of the divine elite, whether they're direct children of Anu or just, members of the highest godly class. It signals inherent authority.
Like divine royalty.
Precisely.
Mhm.
And this sort of aristocratic function, it's pretty much backed up by scholarly consensus. Whether the term meant a fixed list of gods or not, and that's debated, it definitely worked as a collective label for the great gods.
Yeah.
They are the elite.
Right. And when you look at lists of who these great gods were, like the ones you find in sources like Britannica, it's basically a who's who of the Mesopotamian pantheon.
It really is. You've got the heavy hitters, Enlil, the god of air and command, Ea, or Enki, the god of water and wisdom, Ninhursag, the great mother goddess, Sin, the moon god, Shamash, the sun god, and Inanna, or Ishtar, the powerful goddess of love and war.
So if you were a major player, especially back in the Sumerian city-state days, you were often just counted among the Anunnaki.
Pretty much. It seems less like, say, joining a specific club with a membership card, and more like having a hereditary seat in the House of Lords. It's about rank.
That makes sense.
I-
But this fluidity, this idea of it being a collective term, raises a really important question about worship. Did people actually, build temples to the Anunnaki as a group?
That's a fantastic point, and it's where the mythology bumps up against real-world religious practice. If you look at the archaeology, the evidence just doesn't support collective worship of the Anunnaki as one single entity.
Really?
Think about it. We find major temples dedicated to Enlil in Nippur, to Inanna in Uruk, to Enki in Eridu. Each of these major gods have their own distinct, vibrant cults.
With their own priests, their own festivals.
Exactly. Separate operations. So the term Anunnaki seems to have been descriptive, defining their elite status, their rank,
Yeah.
but not prescriptive. He didn't tell people how to worship them collectively.
Gotcha. So it was more like a theological category used in the stories, maybe, not a specific cult people joined.
That's a great way to put it. A descriptor in myths and poems to refer to the assembly of the big decision makers. And understanding that is absolutely vital context when they start getting contrasted with another group of deities, the Igigi. Ah, yes, the Igigi. This connection or contrast is one of the points that gets really tangled up in modern interpretations, isn't it?
Definitely. It's a source of a lot of confusion. What's the relationship between these two groups?
Yeah.
Well, initially, particularly if you look at texts from the old Babylonian period, the terms Igigi and Anunnaki could be used a bit loosely, sometimes almost interchangeably, just meaning the great gods, in a general sense.
Okay, so sometimes they were synonyms.
Sometimes, yeah. But then, the moment the mythology needed to really tackle the issue of divine labor, who actually did the hard work of setting up the cosmos, a really crucial, dramatic distinction gets drawn.
And this is where the Atrahasis myth becomes so important. Absolutely central. In the Akkadian myth Atrahasis, it's laid out very clearly. The Igigi are not the same as the Anunnaki. The Igigi are explicitly described as the lower class of gods.
The workers.
The workers, exactly. They're the ones doing the backbreaking manual labor, digging canals, dredging rivers, hauling massive baskets of earth, all the foundational work needed to make the world habitable for the senior gods.
Okay, so the Igigi are on the cosmic construction crew. What are the Anunnaki doing?
The Anunnaki in this myth are specifically the 7 great gods. They are the supervisors, the elite, the ones for whom all this hard labor is being done.
Right, so the Anunnaki are kicking back in their divine offices, maybe sipping ambrosia, while the Igigi are out there sweating under the Mesopotamian sun.
That's pretty much the picture Atrahasis paints. It firmly establishes the Anunnaki as the managerial class. And as we'll see, this is absolutely key to understanding why humans were created in the first place.
Okay, so managers, elite, supervisors. But
Yeah.
even while that's their main role early on, you mentioned there's this foreshadowing of a much darker role.
Yes, it's fascinating. Even amidst their primary early functions, cosmic provision, maintaining order, the dictionary summaries of the texts point to an early link with Chthonic jurisprudence.
Chthonic jurisprudence sounds serious.
It basically means underworld law, justice for the dead. And sure enough, they pop up specifically as the judges in the underworld in a very early Sumerian text, the Descent of Inanna.
Wow. So judging the dead, that role was kind of baked in from early on, even before they became the big judicial force in later myths.
It seems that way.
Yeah.
It's like their destiny as the ultimate arbiters of fate, especially after life, was already waiting for them down there, even when their main job was up here managing the cosmos.
Okay, let's step back now into that earlier period, the early dynastic Sumerian times. What did the earliest surviving texts, like the hymns, actually show the Anunnaki doing? You said they were surprisingly benevolent.
Yes, in these early portrayals, they come across as generally positive figures. High-ranking, certainly, but also clearly subordinate to the supreme divine authorities. They're deeply involved in the practicalities of the cult and setting up civilization.
How so?
Well, for instance, in A Hymn to Nibru in Ishmidagan, the great city of Nibru, Enlil's city, is described as being built specifically to generate life-giving food for the Inanna gods.
Ah, so they're the ones receiving the benefits of the cult. They rely on the system functioning.
Exactly. They're the beneficiaries of the offerings, the sustenance provided by the temple economy, and, by extension, by humanity.
And their place in the divine hierarchy is spelled out too, right? And how they relate to the top dogs, Enlil and his consort Ninlil.
Absolutely. The hymn gives us this really vivid image. The Anunnaki gaze up at Enlil and Ninlil like children at their parents.
Like children at their parents, that's quite a picture.
It is. It highlights their status. They're important, part of the divine family, you might say. But it also clearly shows they're subordinate. They look up to the ruling couple with reverence, maybe even a bit of dependence. They're powerful ministers, perhaps, but definitely not the ultimate sovereigns themselves.
That image is critical, isn't it? It establishes right away that while the Anunnaki are the great gods collectively, they aren't the final word. They're looking up.
And this dependence, this need for provision, connects them directly to how humanity gets its own provisions. If you look at the debate between grain and sheep, one of those classic Sumerian literary contests.
Right, where personified concepts argue.
Exactly. The text describes this primordial time. The Inanna gods are there on the holy mound where sheep and grain were first created. But interestingly, even these fundamental staples, sheep and grain, weren't quite enough to satisfy the Inanna gods themselves.
They needed more, or better.
It seems they weren't fully sated. So what do, they essentially pass the gift down the chain. They give the sheep and the grain to humankind.
Okay, so they delegate the food source to us.
Precisely. And this act links the Inanna directly to human fertility and prosperity. Later in the debate, the character Grain actually boasts that she is a gift from the Inanna gods.
Ah, so it frames them not just as gods who get offerings, but as the high gods who actually provide the basis for human life, our food, our agriculture.
Yes, the cosmic grantors of the essentials for survival. They enable human society by providing its foundation.
This theme of providing, but also maybe needing relief themselves, it feels like a perfect lead-in to the whole story of human creation, which, in the Sumerian view, was all about easing the god's burden, right?
Exactly right. It connects directly. The Song of the Hoe, another important text, confirms this motivation. The reason humans were created, explicitly linked to giving the gods some relief.
Relief from what?
From toil, from work. The text says that after Enlil creates humankind, often called the black-headed people, which is how Mesopotamians referred to themselves, the Inanna gods approach Enlil.
And they don't just walk up as equals, I assume, based on the children-parents thing.
No, definitely not. They perform obeisance, they bow down, show respect to Enlil, and they implore him, they plead on behalf of these newly created humans.
Okay, but why? If humans were made to work for them.
Because their creation meant the Inanna didn't have to do the work anymore. The crucial detail in the hymn is their emotional reaction. The Inanna were rejoicing. They were ecstatic, jubilant.
Ah, because humans had arrived to take over the hard labor.
Exactly. Humans relieved them of the burden of toil.
Wow. So that narrative, right there in the early Sumerian sources, basically establishes the reason for human existence. We were made to serve, to do the physical work the Anunnaki found too tedious or difficult.
That's the theological bedrock right there. It sets the stage for the later, perhaps darker Akkadian creation myths. It firmly positions the Anunnaki as the high-ranking elite who benefit from the cosmic economy but don't perform the labor themselves.
They are the divine managers who always needed someone else to carry the cosmic load, whether it was lesser gods or eventually us.
Precisely.
They needed a workforce. Okay, so we've got them established as these supervisors, these beneficiaries who needed relief. Their role then seems to expand into actually setting the rules for the universe, doesn't it? This is where they start acting like a proper divine council.
Yes, their function as a powerful decision-making body really comes into focus, especially when you look at the influence of Enki, the god of wisdom.
Enki again. He seems central.
He really is in many contexts. The composition Enki and the world order is incredibly important for defining the Anunnak's place in the cosmic administration. Enki is often called the lord of plenty of the Anunnaki gods.
Their leader, essentially.
Effectively, yes. Their immediate superior, their patron in many ways.
And the text shows how they interact with him. It shows their respect, right, but also their lower rank.
Oh, absolutely. It's very detailed. After Enki gives this long, impressive speech, basically listing all the amazing things he's done to organize the universe, set up rivers, assign jobs to other gods,
His cosmic CV.
Exactly. After his cosmic CV, the Anunnaki gods respond. And how do they respond? They stand in prayer and supplication. They address him using incredibly reverent language, acknowledging his supreme role in ordering everything.
So total deference.
Total deference. And we also get these lovely little details about their lifestyle in Sumer. The text says they take up dwellings there, they consume food in the Guguna shrines.
Hold on, Yaguna shrines. What exactly were those? Worth pausing on that detail.
Good question. Yeah, Jiguna generally refers to a specific part of a temple complex, often an elevated sacred chamber or residence. It signifies the high, pure, almost secluded status of the deity dwelling there.
Okay.
So the fact that the Anunnaki are described as eating and living in these high, pure, elevated Jiguna reinforces their elite status. They are quite literally the upstairs residents in the cosmic manor.
Got it. The divine board of directors in the penthouse suite, basically. Standing by respectfully while Enki lays out the cosmic blueprint.
That's a good way to picture it. But what makes this text, Enki and the World Order, really critical, beyond those visual details, is something it states repeatedly about their actual authority.
Which is?
It states twice that the Anunnaki decree the fates of mankind.
Decree the fates. So they're not just sitting back and enjoying the provisions. They're actively involved in deciding how things turn out for humans.
Yes. They are the determiners of destiny. They're signing off on the grand plan for humanity, the overall conditions of life. This confirms their role as that ultimate governing body, the divine council whose decisions have real impact on every single mortal.
So they were judging the fate of the living long before they took on judging the dead in the underworld. That's significant.
It is.
But wait, if they had this incredible authority to decree fates, how do we square that with other myths where they seem completely overpowered or dominated by other individual gods?
That's where the concept of, political theology really comes into play. Their power, while immense, seems to have been relative. It wasn't absolute, meaning the Anunnaki, as a collective, often served as a kind of divine measuring stick, a foil, almost. Their submission could be used to emphasize the overwhelming power of a single, perhaps ascending deity, maybe one being promoted by a particular city-state or a powerful ruler.
Okay, and this is where the goddess Inanna makes her grand entrance, right? Especially in those texts by Enheduanna, the famous priestess poet.
Exactly. And Enheduanna's compositions are fierce. They pull no punches in subordinating the Anunnaki to Inanna.
How fierce are we talking?
In the exaltation of Inanna, Enheduanna is basically laying down the law, declaring Inanna's total supremacy over the entire council of great gods. She writes that the Anunna have submitted to you. She explicitly states how you surpass the great Anunna gods.
Surpass them, okay.
And then she really drives the point home with this image of utter submission. The Anunna kiss the ground for you.
Kiss the ground. Wow. That's not just respect. That's formal, total subjugation. It reduces the entire collective of princely seed to, groveling petitioners before Inanna?
It does. And another hymn attributed to Enheduanna in Nenansat Gra takes it even further, describing their fear.
Fear.
Yes.
Yeah.
That text says the Anunna crawl before Inanna's word and tremble at her roar.
Crawl and tremble.
Think about that. This council of fate decreers, the highest divine assembly, could be forced to crawl and tremble by the sheer power and fury of one goddess, Inanna. It's a critical insight. Their collective power wasn't absolute.
So a council of judges and administrators, but their authority is definitely conditional. And their limits are shown even more starkly in that other myth, Inanna and Iba, where it's not even a major god challenging them, but a mountain.
Yeah, it's a fascinating little detail that really undercuts any idea of them being all-powerful. The mountain deity, Iba, gets angry, and in its rage, it spread fear among the holy dwellings of the Anunna deities.
They were scared of a mountain.
Apparently so. They were shaken, genuinely terrified by this local natural force that went rogue. It reinforces the idea that while they might decree fates on a grand scale, they weren't omnipotent. cosmic disruptions or the power of other entities could definitely rattle them and expose their limitations.
Okay, so powerful but not all-powerful, managers but sometimes subordinate. Before we jump fully into the Akkadian period and the big epics, we should probably touch on that labor issue again. The seeds for the big revolt in Atrahasis were already sown in these earlier Sumerian texts too, weren't they?
Absolutely. It's foreshadowed quite clearly. In Enki and Nimma, for instance, the scenario is laid out.
Yeah.
The Anuna gods were born, senior gods were overseeing things, and it was the minor gods who were doing the actual hard labor, carrying those heavy baskets of earth to build the world.
And they didn't like it.
Not one bit. The text mentions the gods complaining bitterly about the toil, the drudgery. And this divine labor dispute continues until eventually humans are created specifically to relieve them. So again, it consistently places the Anunnaki in that supervisory managerial role, setting the stage perfectly for their function in the later Babylonian epics.
Right now we're moving into the old Babylonian period, Akkadian language, bigger empires emerging, and the myths start to formalize these divine relationships in a much more structured, almost political way. That distinction between the Anunnaki and the Igigi, it really solidifies in Atrahasis, doesn't it? Giving us the full picture of their managerial role.
This is absolutely the pivotal moment, the key shift where the Anunnaki's high status gets explicitly defined by their freedom from work.
Okay.
In Atrahasis, the Igigi are now specifically called the sixth-generation gods, and their job, performing the truly backbreaking labor for the supervising elite, the seven Anunnaki, identified here as the great gods.
And the text describes this labor.
Oh yeah. It talks about them digging canals, suffering through the dust and the heat. For 40 years straight, it says, with no end in sight. Just relentless hard work.
40 years of that. No wonder it leads to rebellion. This isn't just grumbling anymore, it's a full-blown strike, right?
That's a full-on revolt. A labor uprising among the gods. The Igigi have had enough. They rise up, it says, in the middle of the night.
And dramatic.
Very. They abandon the work sites, they gather their tools, their hated baskets, and they set them on fire. Then they march and surround the residents of Enlil, the chief god, shouting their demands. An end to this unbearable toil.
And how does Enlil react and the Anunnaki?
Enlil is terrified. He and his advisors are completely shaken. You've got this angry, exhausted, desperate mob of minor gods at the gates. They're dangerous. So the Anunnaki, the management, they have to convene an emergency meeting to figure out how to solve this labor crisis.
Right. What's the solution they come up with?
Well, the solution, which is proposed by the ever-clever Enki and then agreed upon by the Anunnaki Council, is, well, it's highly administrative but also deeply sacrificial.
How so?
The council decides that one god must be sacrificed, slaughtered.
Oh.
Yeah. From the blood of this slain god, the texts sometimes name him as Geshtui or We-Ila, mixed with clay. A new being will be fashioned, humankind. And the specific purpose given, to bear the yoke and carry the god's burden.
Wow. So in this absolutely foundational myth, the Anunnaki are cemented as the ultimate cosmic managers who first delegate work to lower gods, and then when that workforce rebels, they literally invent a whole new mortal species whose entire reason for existence is permanent subservient labor.
That's the chilling logic of it, yes.
They create mortality and servitude just so they don't have to pick up a shovel themselves.
It frames human existence entirely around relieving the divine burden, and that managerial role, that status. It gets radically expanded, almost co-opted, when the city of Babylon rises to become this huge imperial power.
And with Babylon comes the rise of its patron god Marduk.
Exactly. And Marduk's rise is chronicled in that monumental epic, the Enuma Elish. This is where the Anunnaki really transition from being this somewhat fluid divine council into something more like bureaucratic personnel for the empire.
Bureaucratic personnel, how does that happen? Marduk defeats the chaos monster Tiamat, sets up cosmic order. What does he do with the Anunnaki?
He completely reorganizes the divine hierarchy and absorbs them into his new Babylonian imperial system. After his victory, Marduk calls all the gods together and imposes this major administrative reform. He divides the Anunnaki into a specific number, 600 total.
A fixed number. 600.
Yes, the text is very precise. He assigns 300 to Anu in heaven and 300 on earth.
300 up, 300 down. That feels very structured, very deliberate. Why is that split so significant?
Because it's about centralization and control. It takes this potentially fluid group, the great gods, and gives them fixed posts, a defined number, and specific domains, heaven and earth, which likely includes the underworld by implication. Marduk is essentially creating cosmic departments.
He's assigning them stations.
Exactly. defining their roles, probably their incomes or resource allocations too, within his new, unified Babylonian cosmos. He's ensuring their power is now exercised firmly within the boundaries he sets. It effectively replaces the old system of localized city god loyalties with one massive, centralized divine bureaucracy, mirroring the structure of the earthly empire.
And how do the Anunnaki react to being, well, bureaucratized? Do they complain?
Not at all. Their reaction isn't rebellion, it's profound gratitude. They are thrilled. They're relieved from that existential burden of labor which humans now handle, and they're given secure positions within this new, stable cosmic order.
So what do they do to show their gratitude?
They propose to build Marduk a magnificent sanctuary, a home worthy of the new king of the gods. And they don't just suggest it. They roll up their divine sleeves and build it themselves. They construct Babylon, the earthly reflection of Marduk's power, and its great temple, Esagila.
The Anunnaki build Babylon.
Yes. They complete it, the text says, within a year. So the former High Council, the princely seed, are now fully integrated as loyal, grateful administrators who actively endorse and physically construct Marduk's imperial capital. Their obedience is now absolute. They become part of the imperial project.
Okay, so Enuma Elish locks down their administrative role within the Babylonian system, but then the Epic of Gilgamesh, which comes later, seems to reinforce their judicial power and also adds this really chilling layer of destructiveness.
Yes, Gilgamesh shows them in a much harsher light. They're definitely not portrayed as benevolent administrators here. In the famous flood story within the epic.
The one that sounds a lot like Noah's flood.
That's the one. In that narrative, the Anunnaki are active participants in the destruction of humanity. The text says they help bring the flood waters, and more vividly, they lift torches to set the land ablaze during the great storm.
Setting the world on fire, that's intense.
It is. They are depicted as a force of cosmic devastation, contributing to the near annihilation of the human race. Although, interestingly, the text does add a touch of complexity. Later, it shows them weeping alongside the goddess Ishtar as the storm finally subsides.
Weeping, so maybe some regret. Or just overwhelmed by the destruction they caused.
It suggests perhaps a conflicted reaction, yeah, an emotional response to the catastrophe they helped unleash. But their real power in Gilgamesh comes after the flood, doesn't it? In that final terrifying decree they make about the human condition.
Right, the judgment.
Exactly. After the waters go down, the survivors emerge, sacrifices are made, the Anunnaki assemble again, along with the other high gods. And what do? They collectively establish death and life.
Establish death and life.
Meaning they make the final, definitive decree that mortality, death, will be the inescapable, permanent fate of all humans from that point on. This connects perfectly back to their early Sumerian role as fate decreers, but now elevates it to the ultimate, irreversible judgment. They become the final judicial authority confirming our condition, servitude during life, and inevitable death at the end. They lock it in.
Wow. Okay, when you lay it all out like that, it's an absolutely stunning transformation. We literally started with this princely seed, this elite group who looked up to Enlil like kids who could be scared by a mountain.
Right.
And we end up with these 600 cosmic bureaucrats who built Babylon as a thank you gift and then delivered the final verdict that, yep, humans are mortal, end of story. That's quite the journey. Can we sort of recap that evolution concisely, put it on a timeline?
Sure. If we boil it down, you see roughly 3 major phases reflected in the text we have. First, you've got the early dynastic Sumerian period.
Okay.
Here, the Anunnakis are definitely high gods. They're seen as benevolent providers sometimes. They receive the cult offerings, and crucially, they decree fates. But, this is key, they're often subordinate to figures like Enlil or Enki or Inanna. Their power is conditional.
Got it. Phase 1. Powerful but subordinate providers and fate decreers. What's phase 2?
Phase 2 is the old Babylonian Akkadian period. This is where things get formalized, structured, especially around that issue of labor.
Right, Atrahasis and the Igigi revolt.
Exactly. They clearly become the managerial elite, the supervisors overseeing the Igigi. They also take on a more destructive role in myths like the flood story. And critically, this is when they start getting integrated into that centralized imperial structure under Marduk in Babylon.
The 300 and 300 split.
Yep. Marduk officially divides their ranks, defines their cosmic stations. They become defined as bureaucratic administrators within an imperial system.
Okay, so phase 2. Managerial elite, sometimes destructive, increasingly structured and bureaucratized under empire. Is there a phase 3 or does it blend from there?
It sort of blends and solidifies from there, especially reinforcing their judicial role, like we see in Gilgamesh with the decree of mortality. Their identity becomes tied to cosmic administration and final judgment.
So the big question then is why? Why this dramatic evolution? It can't just be random storytelling choices over centuries, can it? There must be a deeper reason for these shifts.
No, it's definitely not random. The scholarly argument, and the evidence really supports this, is that the changing roles of the Anunnaki perfectly mirror fundamental shifts in Mesopotamian political theology.
Political theology, meaning politics driving the religion.
In a way, yes. Or at least the theology adapting to reflect and support the political reality. Think about the shift in human society. Power moved from smaller, decentralized, often competing city-states, each focused on their own local patron god, Enki in Eridu, Inanna in Uruk, Enlil in Nippur,
Right.
towards large, centralized empires, like the one ruled from Babylon.
Okay, so as the human power structure changed from local cities to a big empire?
The divine structure described in the myths had to follow suit. It had to reflect and legitimize that new imperial reality.
Ah, so the Anunnaki changing from being, say, Enki's council members to becoming Marduk's 600 administrators. That's theological justification for Babylon's dominance.
Precisely. Their restructuring and absolute obedience under Marduk in the Enuma Elish serves as powerful theological propaganda. It establishes a stable, universally recognized divine hierarchy that mirrors and endorses the unified empire of Babylon on earth. Their mythological function always adapted to serve the political needs and cultural worldview of the society producing the texts.
That makes so much sense. So the key takeaway then for you listening is that this term Anunnaki, it's not a fixed thing. It's fundamentally a flexible, politically sensitive collective term.
Exactly. It is not a static roster of 7 specific alien visitors or even just a fixed group of gods throughout history.
Its meaning shifts depending on the myth, depending on the time period, depending on the political context.
Absolutely. Which is why you have to be really cautious when you encounter later traditions, or especially modern popular theories, that try to freeze them into one single rigid definition. The original sources just don't support that. They show constant change and adaptation. Hashtag tag outro.
What a journey. Seriously, we've watched this group of gods go from fearing a mountain and looking up to Enlil like children to becoming the elite administrators who demanded Babylon be built and then laid down the law on human mortality. That is a powerful demonstration of how theological identity can be completely reshaped to fit the political needs of the day.
It's a profound process, seeing how myth adapts to power. And, speaking of how things change over time, the source material we looked at mentioned that the next step in this kind of research often involves examining their transition into the later Neo-Assyrian period.
Okay.
And critically, digging into how these modern misinterpretations, like the whole ancient astronauts thing, actually arose, mostly in the 20th century.
Right. Which leads to maybe a final provocative thought for you, the listener, to chew on. If the Anunnaki's role, their very identity, could change so radically and relatively quickly based on shifts in ancient political power, moving from city-state religion to imperial theology, what does that suggest about how our modern systems of power, or even our modern ways of creating myths and narratives, might be shaping our own collective ideas about authority, about divinity, about ultimate reality right now?
That's a deep question. It suggests the process of myth-making isn't just something ancient people did.
Exactly. Maybe it never stops. Maybe our myths are always, in some way, a reflection of the power structures that sustain them, even today. Something to think about.